Imagine coming home from vacation, ready to relax, only to find that your entitled neighbor has thrown a full-blown wedding in your backyard without asking. Chairs, decorations, a DJ, hundreds of guests. And the worst part? She told everyone I approved it. That's right. Karen hijacked my yard, lied to the whole neighborhood, and thought she could get away with it. But she didn't count on one thing. I was about to give her the worst wedding gift of her life. Stick around, because this is a story of trespassing, revenge, and the most satisfying karma ever. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. The kind of place where the biggest drama involved whose hydrangeas were blooming the best that year. But of course, every paradise has its serpent, and ours went by the name of Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the neighbor. The self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, though she technically had no real power. That didn't stop her from marching around the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, like she was enforcing some sacred law of suburban perfection. She took her duties very seriously. Too seriously. She once handed me a violation notice because there was a single leaf on my driveway. A leaf. As if it had committed an unforgivable crime against the aesthetics of the community. Another time, she knocked on my door to inform me that my mailbox was off-white instead of approved white. She even attempted to write up my neighbor Tom because his cat was trespassing on her lawn. You can't write up a cat, Tom had said, blinking at her in disbelief. Oh, I can, Karen huffed. HOA rule number 12 states that pets must remain on their owner's property at all times. But he's a cat, Tom pointed out. Karen had simply sniffed and strutted off, as if she had just delivered the final word on the matter. That was Karen in a nutshell, obsessed with rules, most of which she either made up or took to absurd extremes. But I'd learned to live with it. I humored her, nodded along when she went on one of her power trips, and mostly ignored her ridiculousness. That is, until she went too far. It all started a few days before I was supposed to leave for vacation. I had spent weeks planning the trip, a much-needed break from work, stress, and yes, Karen. The idea of being thousands of miles away from her clipboard of doom was almost too good to be true. I was loading my car when she approached, her usual smug expression plastered across her face. Going somewhere? She asked, as if my packed suitcase wasn't obvious enough. Yep, heading out for a bit, I replied, keeping it vague. Karen had a way of prying into people's business, and I had no interest in giving her unnecessary details. She pursed her lips. How long? Just a little while, I said, shutting the trunk. Why? Oh, no reason, she said in a tone that very much suggested there was a reason. I narrowed my eyes. Karen. She flashed a tight, too sweet smile. Just curious. Neighborhood safety and all. That should have been my first red flag. But at that moment, I was too eager to hit the road to dwell on Karen's weird behavior. I chalked it up to her usual nosiness and got into my car, waving her off. I had no idea what I was leaving behind. The texts started rolling in a few days later. At first, I ignored them, friends and neighbors sending vague, "Hey, did you approve this?" messages. I figured they were talking about some minor HOA nonsense, something Karen had probably stirred up again. But when I finally checked my phone properly, my stomach dropped. The messages weren't about some trivial HOA dispute. They were about my backyard. Tom sent a picture first. It showed dozens of white folding chairs, floral arrangements, and a huge decorative arch set up right where my patio used to be. Hey, were you renting out your place for a wedding? Tom's text read. A wedding? On my property? I nearly choked on my drink. I scrolled through more messages. Neighbor after neighbor confirming what I could barely wrap my head around. Karen had taken over my backyard and turned it into a full-blown wedding venue. While I was gone, without my permission, I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. Oh, this was war. Karen had always been a control freak, but this was a whole new level of insanity. Turning my backyard into her personal wedding venue while I was away wasn't just bold. It was criminal. I tried to process the pictures Tom sent, but my brain kept short-circuiting. White folding chairs neatly arranged in rows. A long aisle lined with delicate flower petals. A massive decorative arch right where my grill used to be. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe this was a prank. Maybe someone had photoshopped this just to mess with me. Then another text came in. From Sarah across the street. Hey, just a heads up, Karen said you offered your yard for her daughter's wedding? I thought that was weird, but I figured maybe you two made up. Made up? Oh no. Oh no. I shot back a reply. Offered? Are you serious? I'm out of town. I didn't offer anything. She did this without asking me. 3 little dots appeared on the screen. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Oh wow. Yeah, she's telling everyone you approved it. The wedding is tomorrow. Tomorrow. As in, less than 24 hours from now. I called Tom immediately. What the hell is going on? Dude, he said, lowering his voice. It's nuts. There's been people in and out of your yard all week. At first, I thought you hired landscapers, but then the decorations started going up, and he hesitated. Man, it's a whole thing. Tents, caterers, even a DJ. I tried to tell Karen she should check with you, but she kept saying it was all pre-approved. My hands clenched into fists. I never approved anything. Yeah, I figured that out real fast when I saw your texts. A cold, slow-burning rage settled in my chest. Karen had lied to the entire neighborhood. She had trespassed, vandalized my property, and now she was hosting a full wedding at my expense. And the worst part, she wasn't even trying to hide it. Tom hesitated before speaking again. So, what do you want to do? I already knew exactly what I wanted to do. But I wasn't going to rush it. Karen had spent years acting like she was untouchable, like the HOA's imaginary rulebook made her the supreme ruler of the cul-de-sac. If she wanted to throw a wedding in my backyard, fine. She was about to have the worst wedding of her life. I booked an early flight home. The moment I pulled into my driveway, my jaw nearly hit the steering wheel. My backyard, my private property, had been transformed into something straight out of a bridal magazine. Twinkling fairy lights wrapped around my trees, elegant white linens covered long tables, and a literal dance floor had been set up where my garden used to be. And standing in the middle of it all, barking orders like a deranged wedding planner, was Karen. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was too busy directing workers who were setting up an absurdly oversized champagne fountain. I slammed my car door shut. Heads turned. Murmurs started. Karen's shoulders tensed before she slowly pivoted toward me, her face stretching into a tight, unnatural smile. Oh, you're back early. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just crossed my arms and let the silence hang between us. Karen cleared her throat. Listen, I know what this looks like. Really? I said, voice flat. Because it looks like you've lost your damn mind. Her eye twitched, but she kept her fake, sugary tone. I assumed you wouldn't mind. I mean, you weren't even using the space. It would have been a waste to let such a beautiful yard go to waste when my daughter needed a venue. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. You assumed I wouldn't mind? Well, she waved a hand dismissively. You weren't here to ask, so I made an executive decision. An executive decision, I echoed. On my property. Karen's smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it back on. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. After all, it's just one day. I glanced around at the absurdly extravagant setup. One day. Do you have any idea how much damage has already been done? Oh, don't be so dramatic, she scoffed. It's just a wedding. We'll clean up afterward. Clean up? Oh, sure. Just like she had cleaned up after the last neighborhood event she took over, by leaving a trail of trash and half-eaten cupcakes all over the street. I clenched my jaw. Karen, you didn't ask for permission. You lied to the entire neighborhood, saying I approved this. And now my yard has been completely taken over. Karen's smile finally cracked. I was going to tell you. When? After the honeymoon. She had no answer for that. I took another step forward, lowering my voice just enough that she could hear the pure venom in my tone. You have 10 minutes to start tearing all of this down. Karen gasped like I had just slapped her with a bouquet. You can't be serious. The guests are arriving in an hour. I don't care if the Queen of England is arriving in an hour. This is my house. My property. And you're trespassing. That word finally seemed to register. Trespassing. Karen's face went from fake sweetness to full-blown panic in a matter of seconds. Oh, come on, don't be so selfish. This is my daughter's big day. No, I said deadly calm. This is my backyard, and you have exactly 9 minutes left. For the first time since I had met her, Karen looked well and truly speechless. But that silence didn't last long, because the moment I pulled out my phone and started dialing the police, all hell broke loose. Karen's face went from shock to furious the moment she saw me dialing. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. I raised an eyebrow. Watch me. Her hands flew up in exasperation. Oh, come on. Are you really going to ruin a wedding over something so small? I gestured to the massive white tent, the fancy floral arrangements, and the literal dance floor built into my backyard. Small, Karen scoffed. You're being unreasonable. The guests will be here soon. Do you really want to humiliate my daughter like this? Ah, there it was. The guilt trip. The classic Karen maneuver. Karen, you humiliated yourself the moment you decided to throw a party on someone else's property without permission. Her lips pressed together into a thin, furious line. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, scrambling for a way to twist this in her favor. But before she could start another dramatic speech, I held up a finger. You have 8 minutes. She paled slightly but stood her ground. You're seriously going to call the cops? I'm seriously going to call the cops. I hit dial. Karen's jaw dropped. Wait. I turned away slightly so she couldn't snatch the phone out of my hand. 911, what's your emergency? Before I could answer, Karen lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Listen, she hissed in a whisper. We can fix this. Just give me a second. I yanked my arm free. No, you had a second. You had weeks to ask me. You didn't. Instead, you lied to the entire neighborhood and treated my property like a free rental space. Karen looked around wildly. A few of the wedding workers were watching, some pretending to adjust decorations while clearly eavesdropping. Tom stood near his driveway, arms crossed, smirking at the unfolding disaster. Finally, Karen let out a strangled groan and stomped her foot. Fine. She whirled around and clapped her hands. Everyone, start packing up. A few of the workers hesitated. Now, she snapped. They jumped into action, quickly pulling down decorations and folding chairs. Karen spun back toward me, seething. I hope you're happy, she spat. Oh, I am, I said, shoving my phone back into my pocket. But I'm not done yet. Her face twisted with suspicion. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled sweetly. Well, Karen, seeing as you and your wedding guests were planning to use my property, I assume you had a backup venue just in case? The way her eye twitched told me everything I needed to know. She didn't have a backup plan. I let out an exaggerated gasp. Wait, you mean to tell me you didn't pay for a venue? You just assumed you could use my yard for free. Karen's eye twitched harder. I laughed. Wow, that's embarrassing. She clenched her fists. I was going to offer you money after the fact. I drawled. And I was going to let you, not get the cops called on you. But hey, here we are. Her face burned red. I let out a sigh. Tell you what, Karen, I'll be generous. Since you've already paid for all these vendors, I won't have them waste their time. Instead of calling the police, I'll just send you a bill for damages and rental fees. Karen's rage transformed into pure horror. What? You can't. Oh, but I can, I said, pulling out my phone again. Let's see. How much does it cost to rent an event space of this size? Maybe I'll charge you, $5,000. Karen gasped like I had just told her I was going to set her house on fire. That's insane. No, what's insane is breaking into someone's yard and throwing a wedding. I shot back. Now, unless you want me to file a trespassing report, I suggest you figure out how to pay me. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Her entire body trembled with barely contained rage. But she wasn't stupid. She knew I had her cornered. She spun on her heel and stomped toward her daughter, who had just arrived in a fancy white gown, looking confused and increasingly panicked. Karen grabbed her by the shoulders, whispering furiously in her ear. A few seconds later, the bride's face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I saw Karen shooting me a murderous glare, and whatever pity I had evaporated. It took 2 hours for them to dismantle everything. The caterers left in a huff. The DJ, who had just finished setting up, grumbled while packing his equipment. The florist angrily yanked out her flowers and stormed off. By the time they were done, my yard looked like a battlefield. Bits of confetti and flower petals were scattered everywhere. Stomped grass. A few stray chairs. Karen was the last to leave. She stomped past me, eyes blazing. This isn't over, she hissed. I grinned. Oh, I hope it isn't. She whirled around. What's that supposed to mean? I crossed my arms. Well, I already called my lawyer about the damages. Expect some paperwork soon. Her face turned ghost white. You wouldn't. I tilted my head. You assumed I wouldn't. She let out a strangled noise and stormed off, dragging her daughter behind her. As soon as she was gone, Tom walked over, shaking his head. Well, he said, laughing, that was better than reality TV. I let out a breath, glancing at the mess. Yeah, but it's not over yet. Because if Karen thought she was getting away with this, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The neighborhood was already buzzing by the time Karen stormed off with her daughter. People who had been peeking through windows were now openly standing on their porches, whispering and exchanging amused glances. Some even had the audacity to pull out lawn chairs and settle in like they were watching the season finale of their favorite drama series. Tom, still grinning, leaned against his fence. "You know you just made history, right?" I sighed, looking at the remnants of the disaster in my backyard. "Oh yeah, what's my prize?" He smirked. "Bragging rights. You just took down Karen." From across the street, Sarah walked over, shaking her head in disbelief. "I knew something was shady the moment she said you approved this. I just didn't think she'd actually pull it off." "Pull it off?" I snorted. "She didn't pull off anything. She crashed and burned." Sarah laughed. "Fair point. But seriously, she had everyone fooled. Even the florist thought this was all legit. She was saying how generous you were for letting Karen use your space." "Oh, so generous," I muttered sarcastically. "Can't wait to see how generous Karen is when she gets my bill." That got another round of laughter from the gathering crowd. As more neighbors wandered over, the stories about Karen's antics started flying. "Did you hear she tried to get Greg's trash cans banned because she thought the lids were the wrong shade of green?" "Oh, that's nothing. Last month, she left 4 anonymous complaints about my wind chimes. Said they were a disturbance to the peace. She once tried to report my driveway for looking uneven." Like, what does that even mean? It was like a Karen support group. Years of pent-up frustration finally being unleashed now that the HOA's self-appointed queen had been dethroned. Then Tom lowered his voice, eyes twinkling with mischief. "You do know what this means, right?" I frowned. "What?" He leaned in conspiratorially. "We have to throw a party." I blinked. "A party?" "Yeah," he grinned. "An unapproved party. The most un-Karen-friendly event this neighborhood has ever seen." The idea was almost too tempting. After years of her nitpicking, her absurd violations, and now this, the thought of celebrating her downfall with a giant, rule-breaking bash was delicious. Sarah was already nodding enthusiastically. "We could have those illegal wind chimes, Greg." "I'll put out my 2 green trash cans," Greg added. "I'll let my cat roam freely," Tom said with a smirk. Someone in the back shouted, "Let's put up Christmas lights in February." It was settled. By the next evening, my backyard, the same backyard Karen had tried to steal, was now the site of the pettiest party in HOA history. Music blasted from portable speakers. Greg's wind chimes clinked happily in the breeze. Sarah strung up an absurd amount of Christmas lights. People brought lawn chairs, coolers, and, just to really hammer the point home, a comically oversized "No Karen's Allowed" banner. The best part? The whole time, Karen was trapped in her house, fuming. I could see her peeking through the blinds every few minutes, her phone in hand, probably trying to figure out who to report us to. But without her imaginary HOA power, she was helpless. Eventually, she must have reached her breaking point, because just as Tom was handing me a drink, we heard her front door slam open. Karen came marching down the sidewalk like a woman on a mission, arms crossed so tightly I thought she might snap in half. She stopped right at the edge of my lawn, her eyes darting around at the festive chaos. "What is this?" Tom took a slow sip of his drink before answering. "A community gathering." Karen's eye twitched. "This is an unauthorized event." Greg held up a plate of cookies. "Want one?" Her nostrils flared. "Do you people have no respect for the rules?" Sarah, barely containing her laughter, said, "Which rules, Karen?" "The ones you made up." Karen's jaw clenched. This is harassment. You're all ganging up on me because of a simple misunderstanding." I stepped forward, arms crossed. "A simple misunderstanding is accidentally using someone's Wi-Fi. You trespassed, vandalized, and threw a whole-ass wedding in my yard." Her face turned beet red. "I was going to fix it." "Yeah, just like you were going to pay me." The crowd fell silent, all eyes on Karen. She opened her mouth, closed it, then glared at me like I had personally ruined her life. Finally, she let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a sigh. "You know what? Fine." She turned sharply, muttering something under her breath as she stomped back to her house and slammed the door shut. A beat of silence. Then, the entire yard erupted into cheers. Greg raised his drink. "To Karen's retirement." I grinned, lifting mine. "To a Karen-free future." For the first time in years, the neighborhood finally felt like a neighborhood again. Karen might have stomped back into her house, but I knew her well enough to realize she wasn't going down without a fight. If there was one thing Karen loved more than her imaginary HOA power, it was revenge. And sure enough, it didn't take long for her to strike back. The very next morning, I woke up to find an official-looking letter taped to my front door. I ripped it off and skimmed the text. Notice of neighborhood violation. I almost burst out laughing right there. Karen had typed up her own fake HOA violation letter and stuck it on my door like she had some sort of legal authority. I read further. You are hereby in violation of Community Ordinance 47 B regarding unauthorized social gatherings. Per the HOA guidelines, large gatherings exceeding 8 people must be pre-approved by the neighborhood committee, chaired by Karen redacted. And failure to comply may result in penalties, fines, and further action. Oh, she was really trying it. I took a deep breath, folded the letter neatly, and walked straight to her house. She must have been waiting, because the second I knocked, her front door flew open. Finally, she huffed, arms crossed. I assume you're here to apologize for the disaster you caused last night. I held up the letter. You do realize this is completely fake, right? Her smug expression didn't falter. It's a formal notice. I stared at her. Karen, there is no Community Ordinance 47B. There is no neighborhood committee. And you are not the HOA. Karen sniffed. The spirit of the HOA still exists. I blinked. Did you just say the spirit of the HOA? She lifted her chin. This neighborhood has standards. And I will not sit back and watch it be turned into a lawless circus by people like you. I wanted to laugh. I really did. But instead I smiled. You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. She looked suspicious. I am. Oh, definitely. We can't have a lawless circus, now can we? She smirked. Exactly. So, I continued, still smiling, it's a good thing I already called my lawyer and reported you for trespassing and property damage. Her smirk vanished. Wait, what? I handed her another piece of paper. This one very real. An official notice from my lawyer outlining the damages she was liable for. I was going to handle this quietly, I said. But since you love official paperwork so much, I figured you'd appreciate some of your own. Karen's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. You can't be serious. Oh, I am dead serious, I said. You threw a wedding on my property without my consent. That's trespassing. You left my yard in ruins. That's vandalism. And you lied to an entire community about it. That's just pathetic. She sputtered. I was going to fix it. Great. Then you won't mind paying for the damages. Karen's eye twitched. She snatched the letter out of my hand, skimmed it, then let out a dramatic gasp. This says I owe $6,000. Yep, I said cheerfully. It's almost like renting a venue isn't free. She shook her head rapidly. No. I'm not paying this. You can't make me. I took a slow step forward. Then I guess I'll just have to take you to court. The color drained from her face. You wouldn't. Oh, Karen, I said sweetly. You assumed I wouldn't. For the first time in her miserable reign, Karen was truly speechless. I turned to leave, but before I stepped off her porch, I added one final thought. Oh, and by the way, I smirked. Your HOA position? The one you love so much. Karen blinked. What about it? I pulled out my phone and showed her an email from the actual HOA board. Subject: removal of Karen redacted from HOA advisory position. Her eyes widened. No. Oh yes, I said. Turns out, when the actual HOA board found out you were using their name to scam people with fake rules, they weren't too happy. Karen made a strangled noise. But I was the one keeping order. Who else will? The board is taking over, I cut in. Which means you have zero power now. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no words came out. I grinned. Have a great day, Karen. And with that, I walked away victorious. But Karen wasn't quite done. The next few weeks were a meltdown of epic proportions. First, she tried to rally her remaining allies, all 3 of them, to protest her removal from the HOA. That fizzled out fast when they realized Karen had literally been making up half the rules she enforced. Then, she tried to file a counter-complaint against me for defamation. That was immediately dismissed because, shocker, telling the truth isn't defamation. Finally, in one last act of pure desperation, she tried to claim squatters' rights on my backyard. Yes, you read that correctly. Karen genuinely tried to argue that since she had used my yard for the wedding, she had some kind of claim to it. The police had to explain to her that no, Throwing a party on someone else's land doesn't make it yours. That was the moment she truly lost. The neighborhood watched as Karen's empire crumbled. She was fined for the damages, humiliated by the HOA, and now nobody respected her anymore. Her final move? She put her house up for sale. The listing went live 3 weeks later, and the second the sign went up, the entire neighborhood celebrated. Tom even threw a farewell barbecue. Karen, of course, didn't attend. She moved out a month later. No dramatic goodbye. No final speech. Just packed her things and left. And just like that, the reign of Karen was officially over. The day Karen's moving truck pulled out of the neighborhood, the air felt lighter. It was like the entire cul-de-sac collectively exhaled, finally free from the oppressive cloud of her clipboard dictatorship. Of course, she didn't leave without a fight. In the weeks leading up to her departure, she had tried everything to avoid paying for the damages she'd caused. First, she claimed she had no money, despite regularly flaunting her expensive handbags and luxury car. Then she tried to convince the HOA to cover her expenses, only to be laughed out of the meeting. Finally, she even went so far as to threaten to countersue me for emotional distress. That backfired spectacularly when my lawyer reminded her that trespassing, property damage, and fraud were actual crimes, and that if she pushed it any further, I'd have no problem escalating to small claims court. In the end, she paid every cent of the $6,000 she owed. Well, technically, her husband did. That was the real cherry on top. Turns out, he had no idea about the wedding debacle until my legal documents landed in their mailbox. He was furious. From what I heard, it wasn't just the lawsuit. Karen's entire history of HOA nonsense had finally caught up with her, and he was done with it. 3 weeks later, she was the one getting hit with divorce papers. Talk about karma. By the time she left, nobody was sad to see her go. No farewell party, no waves from the neighbors, just a few smug smiles as her car disappeared down the street. And the best part, the new family that moved in, they were the exact opposite of Karen. Super friendly, easygoing, and best of all, they hated HOAs. It was like the neighborhood had been blessed with the anti-Karen. At the next HOA meeting, the new homeowners suggested eliminating half the ridiculous rules Karen had been enforcing for years. Things like the mandatory color palettes for front doors, because apparently personal taste was illegal under Karen's rule. The grass length inspection policy, no more surprise measuring tape visits. The absurd restriction on holiday decorations, because God forbid someone puts up a pumpkin on October 1st. The vote, unanimous approval. It was beautiful. As the months passed, life in the neighborhood became normal. People stopped living in fear of Karen's clipboard. No more random violation notices, no more tense standoffs about petty nonsense. And for the first time in years, we actually had fun. We threw block parties, BBQs, unapproved gatherings that Karen would have lost her mind over. Greg's wind chimes made a comeback. Tom's cat roamed freely, taking victory laps across Karen's old yard. And me? I sat on my beautifully unregulated patio, drink in hand, watching my perfectly imperfect yard grow freely. As I leaned back in my chair, I thought about everything that had happened, the stolen backyard, the wedding fiasco, the lawsuit, the epic downfall. And I couldn't help but smile. Because in the end, Karen got exactly what she deserved. With Karen officially gone, life in the neighborhood became something it hadn't been in years, peaceful. No more nonsense about the HOA spirit. No more fake violation notices taped to doors. No more measuring tapes mysteriously appearing in people's yards to check their grass height. It was almost unsettling how quiet things were without her constant interference. But it was the good kind of quiet. The new neighbors, the anti-Karens, were a breath of fresh air. Instead of patrolling the streets looking for petty infractions, they actually talked to people. They even hosted a welcome barbecue, which was hilarious considering Karen had once threatened to fine someone for unauthorized grilling. At that party, we took turns sharing our favorite Karen stories. Sarah laughed as she told everyone about the time Karen tried to regulate the shades of Christmas lights people could use, claiming cool white was acceptable but warm white was too yellow and offensive. Tom recounted his ongoing war with Karen over his cat. She left 6 complaints in my mailbox. About a cat. I think she actually believed she could get him banned from the neighborhood. Greg's personal favorite? The time Karen called a tow truck on his car while he was still inside it. I was just sitting there, drinking my coffee, when this guy knocks on my window and says, "Ma'am, do you need help? I've been asked to tow this vehicle." And I just pointed across the street to Karen, who was standing there, smug as hell. Laughter erupted from the group. And me? I told them about the wedding incident. The whole thing. From the moment I got those texts while on vacation to the showdown in my yard, all the way up to my deliciously petty invoice that forced Karen to pay thousands for her own audacity. By the time I finished, people were wiping away tears, from laughter, not sadness. Tom raised his drink. To Karen's greatest failure. We all clinked glasses. The best part of her departure? The rule changes that came afterward. At the next HOA meeting, all of her stupid restrictions were overturned. No more grass height inspections. No more mailbox color mandates. No more Karen nonsense. The neighborhood transformed. Suddenly, people were actually enjoying their homes instead of living in fear of clipboard patrols. A few months later, I ran into Karen's ex-husband at the grocery store. He looked about 10 years younger, free from the stress of her constant drama. She always acted like she owned the neighborhood, he said, shaking his head. Honestly, I'm surprised you all put up with her for as long as you did. I shrugged. We didn't have much of a choice. Well, he smirked, you sure fixed that. Oh, I definitely did. Karen never showed her face in our neighborhood again. Her reign of terror was over. And as I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the now Karen-free streets, I couldn't help but think. The grass had never looked greener. What would you do if you came home to find a wedding happening in your backyard without permission? Face screaming in fear, house with garden ring. What's the worst thing an entitled neighbor has ever done to you? Share your horror stories in the comments. Eyes, how would you have handled Karen? Would you have gone full petty or called the cops immediately? If you love seeing entitled people get what they deserve, don't forget to smash that like button. It really helps the channel and tells me you want more HOA havoc. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments. What's the craziest neighbor or HOA story you've ever heard? I love reading your wild experiences. White heavy check mark, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another insane HOA saga. More drama, more revenge, and way more satisfying karma coming your way. Bell turn on notifications so you'll be the first to hear when a new HOA nightmare drops. You won't want to miss it. Police Garlight.